Hi. In this video, I'll be talking about trans bodies as political sites for fear. So the sexual standard is white, heterosexual, monogamous sex, and when we see anything else depicted on television or in public, people often begin to panic. I work in a group home that houses LGBTQA youth that were all assigned male at birth, but half of them are heterosexual males and half of them are trans girls. So I was listening to a conversation with two of the kids. One was a boy, one was a girl, and it actually inspired me to choose this topic. So during the discussion, one of the trans girls, who's very sexually open and very open about her gender identity, was talking about sitting on this guy's lap at lunch, and apparently he said to her, "Your vagina's on my leg," and she just laughed about it. And the boy she was talking to was very offended. He thought that she should have disclosed that she has a penis, instead of just letting him think that she has a vagina. And so this kind of opened a long discussion of whether you should feel obligated to disclose private matters in order to avoid deceiving others. And their questions were brought up. If the boy had known it was a penis touching his thigh, would he have automatically been revolted? What kind of mechanisms are at work in situations like this? So I will be talking about transgender bodies as political sites, and I'll be using Gail Rubin's Thinking Sex, Notes for a Radical Theory of Politics of Sexuality, and Sarah Ahmed's Cultural Politics of Emotion to help me analyze the systems that create political bodies and create fear of those improper or sticky bodies. So both mainstream society and feminists marginalize trans people and often perceive their gender nonconformation as deception and or betrayal. So some feminists reject trans women because of a false belief that they are attempting to infiltrate a sisterhood that they do not belong in, and are essentially appropriating female bodies and female culture. Feminists also reject trans men because they are seen as traitors to their kind, and instead of rejecting heterosexual male ideals of femininity and living as butch females, they are seen as assimilating into the patriarchy. Rubin discusses a hierarchy of sexual desires in which some desires are improper and marginalized, while others are considered proper. So since society's sexual standard is white, monoracial, heterosexual, monogamous sex, anything that deviates from this is considered to be less valuable. And the further away it gets, the more deviant it's considered. So, as the standard is white and heterosexual, further away from that would be white and homosexual, further away from that would be black and homosexual, and then it goes into kink and just as far from vanilla as you can get. In Alison Kafer's piece about her experience with desire and devotees, she discusses the dilemma between feeling violated and fetishized for her disability by devotees and accepting that maybe she is a desirable body. I relate to this on a number of levels. I feel like as a trans man, I don't fit into the binary models of sexuality, and therefore I have felt great discomfort with physical intimacy in the past. There are certain ways that people are expected to have sex, and there are certain ways that people expect to have heterosexual sex. So it is a little awkward. I've been approached by a few men who are interested in trans guys or FTMs as a fetish, and while I appreciate and feel validated sometimes by the fact that someone finds me desirable, it also feels as though I'm just a body that can be filled by any person with the same look that I have. And though there are a number of trans amorous people, it's important to remember Diana Torgie's article The Straight Men Who Have Sex with Trans Women, in which she writes, "Wanting to have sex with trans women is not synonymous with undoing the stigma against loving them." So most men that have sex with trans women want them to pass as women in public in order for them to get that validation, for them to remain heterosexual in their own eyes. So, but due to biological factors, it's more difficult for trans women to effectively pass. And while they can appear very feminine, and most trans women that I know are held to a very high standard of femininity, there's still issues like their height and their voice and their bone structure and like their hair that will give them away. This article that Torji writes explores the issues that straight men have when they sleep with trans women, as there's this overwhelming fear of being perceived as gay or feeling gay themselves. And this same fear is illustrated on the TLC show I Am Jazz, which is about a trans girl who's 13 going through transition. And in multiple episodes that I've watched, this girl expresses her difficulty with boys, and it's a little atypical from regular adolescent relationships, because according to Jazz, boys don't give her attention, they don't hug her, they tend to ignore her because she's out as trans and they don't want to be considered gay. So we can discuss Sarah Ahmed's performativity of disgust in relation to the disgust straight men feel towards trans women. As I noted in my previous video, proximity is an important factor in performing disgust. One feels threatened by the disgusting object if it becomes too close. So in terms of straight men and trans women, Torji writes about men worrying about being gay while actually engaging in sexual activity with trans women. They don't go out with the trans woman in public for fear of being seen by others and thus being associated with the disgusting act of homosexuality or transsexualism, which is essentially a threat to mainstream society's gender binary, and proximity could imply one's own involvement in rejecting social norms, and that's frightening for a lot of people to confront. This fear seems to follow gender nonconforming individuals in the form of transphobia, which is very prevalent right now. People fear that terrorists will be dressed up like women when they go through the airport security, as Toby Beauchamp discusses in his article. A number of people also share the idea that trans women are posing and they are just actually sexual predators trying to assault women or girls in the restroom, which is kind of illustrated by a scene in Transparent where the main character, who is a trans woman, is harassed in the restroom. And the politics surrounding public restrooms are based on power dynamics, which is clearly illustrated when there are arguments against a trans man using the men's restroom because it might tempt cis men or cis boys to rape him. So instead of addressing the serious systems of oppression at work, like our nonchalant assumptions and essentially dismissals that boys will be boys, meaning that if you have a vagina, you might get raped if you go too close. And we marginalize the bodies that do not conform and tell them it's for their own protection. The same politics are those that keep transgender individuals out of the military. I also think it's an important point to make that it's more difficult for trans women to pass than it is for trans men. And not only is it more difficult to pass, but they're judged more harshly. It's acceptable or unacceptable for little boys to cross gender lines, wear dresses, and play with girls' toys, where it's more acceptable for girls to be able to play with boys' toys like blocks and like more educational things. But boys that do that are harshly disciplined, and it's apparently equally unacceptable for men to dress up as men, as illustrated by a number of videos, including the reflex video in which the main woman, who was very tall, so people assumed she was a man, was essentially assaulted just for going against norms, and it created this mob mentality. But this all goes back to Rubin's idea that heterosexual males set the standard for sexuality in this society. So when males are then abandoning this model and engaging in sex as women, people don't know what to do. Chaos ensues. Mobs happen. Thank you.